My crochet stitches were way too tight when I was a beginner, and when I did manage to loosen them, I struggled to keep them that way. If that sounds like you, my friend, are crocheting with too much tension. Today I'm going to explain what exactly is crochet tension and how to keep from crocheting tight stitches. Hi there, I'm Laisha from With Love Laisha. Let's jump in. So let's start by understanding what exactly is crochet tension. I think it sounds more complicated than it is. Very simply, crochet tension is how tight you're holding your working yarn when you're crocheting, which affects how tight your stitches are. Putting too much tension on your yarn is going to cause very tight stitches. Loosening up that tension a bit is going to loosen your stitches. Today I'm sharing 4 very simple tips I use that will help you loosen your tension and keep it that way. Number 1, make sure your yarn is flowing freely. You want to make sure you're not getting any resistance from your skein or your cake as your yarn is feeding into your project. This resistance will cause your stitches to be too tight. I like to place my yarn in a bowl from the kitchen or an empty box. If you prefer, you can also buy something from the craft store, an actual yarn bowl, but a DIY option works just fine. And this will keep your yarn from bouncing around too much and prevent some of that resistance. You also want to make sure you don't have any furry yarn goblins pulling on your yarn. As cute as these yarn goblins are, they are not your friend when it comes to maintaining good tension. They're going to be pulling on that yarn, and again, you're going to get too much resistance. You also want to make sure that you free any tangles or knots in your yarn, either before you start your project or while you're working, to prevent any extra resistance. Tip number 2, pull up those loops. A lot of times our stitches are too tight simply because we're not pulling our loops up high enough when we're yarning over and pulling up a loop. And keeping those loops very close to your project creates really tight bound together stitches. So if you just pull that loop up a little bit higher, you will actually loosen your stitches up quite a bit. You also want to pay attention to that very first loop on your hook. This loop actually becomes the top of your stitch. So if that loop is very tight and snug on your hook, you're going to have stitches that are tight and difficult to work back into. Just pulling that loop up a bit will actually loosen the top of your stitch, and your stitches will be much easier to work into. Tip number 3, relax, release your death grip, and breathe. When we're very focused on something, we tend to clench and tense our body. I can almost guarantee if your body is tense, your stitches are too tight. So anytime you find that your shoulders are getting a bit tight, your stitches are too tight, maybe your hand is cramping a bit, just relax, release your grip, and take a breath. And that will help loosen your stitches automatically. Before we jump into our next tip, if you're still with me, you're finding this video helpful, do me a favor and tap that like button below so YouTube shows this to more beginners and they can benefit from it too. Thank you. Tip number 4, cut your yarn some slack. This is how much slack you want to give your yarn. If you hold your yarn too close to your hook, you're not giving yourself enough space to yarn over and your stitches will be too tight. At the same time, if we're holding too far back, well, now we lose control. So we want to find our sweet spot between too tight and not enough control. And our bonus tip is adjust your hold according to your yarn. When I figured this tip out, it dramatically improved my tension and my crochet speed. So as an example, if I'm using a yarn that's very smooth or a very thin yarn, I'm going to adjust my grip so that I have more control and I'm creating more resistance for the yarn to flow through into my project. At the same time, if I'm using a yarn that is chunkier or not so smooth, I'm going to release my grip a little bit and loosen things up because that yarn is already giving me enough resistance. I don't need to create more. Okay, let's recap. So to loosen up your stitches, you need to, 1, make sure your yarn is flowing freely. You're not getting any resistance from that skein or cake. Number 2, pull your loops up higher than you normally would. Number 3, relax, release your death grip, and breathe. This will release any tension in your body, which will also loosen up those stitches. Number 4, give your yarn some slack. Find that sweet spot between not enough control and too tight. And bonus tip number 5, adjust your grip or your hold according to your yarn. You want to make sure you're not giving more resistance than your yarn needs and it's able to flow freely through your fingers. I've got a fun and free project for you to practice all these tips. Head to the description box or the comments below and grab my free, quick, and easy scarf pattern written in plain English to help you crochet a beautiful scarf without the struggle of reading a typical crochet pattern. I've included a how-to guide that details all the steps and stitches mentioned and a full video tutorial. The link is waiting for you. Thank you so much for watching. That does it for me today, you guys. Until next time, keep crocheting with love and patience.